gracing both bookshelves and the screen alike with everything from monsters of the void to a secret society of telepathic children, chances are if you've ever dipped your toe into the murky depths of horror, you'll have come across some of Stephen King's weird work. And of course, the weird theories surrounding it. We've heard that John Coffey from The Green Mile is the second coming of Jesus Christ, but it is hardly a theory when it's an intended allegory. And we know that Andy in The Shawshank Redemption can be considered guilty, but the novel all but voids that theory before it even begins. Looking deeper and weirder then, there's debate on everything from whether King has a bona fide urine fetish to if he paid for an assassination on the man that ran him over. So it's best we keep it to the films for the sake of avoiding the big man's ire. Wouldn't want him to kill you, then piss on you really. Or worse, vice versa. I am the interdimensional space spider Ash from What Culture, and these are 8 Stephen King movie fan theories that will blow your mind. 8. The Children of the Corn features Randall Flagg from The Stand. Let's start with an easy one. The Children of the Corn is a pretty so-so King adaptation, but it's one that fits right into the mythos of his interconnected universe that all ties back to the Dark Tower. Randall Flagg appears in many of King's stories, predominantly The Stand and under the alias of Walter in the Dark Tower if we consult the novels, as a presence of evil. And it seems he stepped into one of his disguises in the Corn movies as a figment of darkness, as he who walks behind the rose. There's many truths and theories behind Randall Flagg's involvement in the King universe as the wider force of malevolence, with fans speculating that anything nasty is born from Flagg's involvement across the whole universe. For this theory, Randall Flagg as evil itself becomes true for him to take on the role of a mysterious shadow entity that controls the Children of the Corn. Essentially, since we never know what it is or where it comes from, fans believe it's an extension of Flagg for these all-encompassing evil reasons. And also for the fact that he just had an affinity for corn in The Stand. Makes sense, to be honest. 7. Frozen is a remake of The Shining. For some reason, we really love connecting films about pain, death, and horrific abominations from the depths of the multiverse with colourful children's movies. Mary Catherine Ham more than others. The Shining and Frozen are the latest in this trend of all things dark and terrible to be imprinted upon the wondrous world of animation, with a strange amount of similarities to be spotted between the two for those that desperately want Elsa to be the next vision of one Jack Torrance. And just how does that work, you might ask? Well, the pair are both driven insane by power in a cold, harsh landscape whilst isolated from the rest of society. They both live in castle-like buildings in the desolate winter, related to family members with supernatural connections that they then shut out, and who in turn feel compelled to play childlike games to entertain themselves in the face of their loneliness. They also both inflict accidental injuries on both Danny and Anna, one being a forceful pull that hurts Danny's arm, and the other being a total loss of control that ices up Anna in the process. There's plenty more parallels to be drawn between Frozen supporting characters and their horror counterparts, but the best is the ending images of Jack Torrance frozen in the snow and of Anna's frosty statue demise. Of course, Disney aren't really going to throw in any gnarly deaths, but if they did, who knows how much closer we could have gotten to The Shining on ice. Ham jokingly quipped that Kubrick predicted Frozen 33 years before release, but who knows? He also faked the moon landing, so the man can do anything. 6. It's Pennywise appears in The Shining. Hang on a minute. You don't remember seeing a giant shape-shifting clown lurking in the corridors of the Overlook Hotel along with Elsa on a mad frost binge? Unsurprising really, since there wasn't actually one there. But then that begs the question, how the hell can Pennywise be linked to The Shining in any which way at all? If we remember that Pennywise himself isn't actually a clown, but rather an interdimensional being that takes on the form of one's greatest fears to then feast on those he terrifies, then his connection to a hotel hell-bent on scaring the bejesus out of its inhabitants isn't that tenuous to make. And whilst it's common for it to target children, this is only because they're easily manipulated through their fear. When offered up the prime cutlet of Jack Torrance, a man defined by the fear of losing his family after abusing his son, and who's after a second chance in a desolate hotel, it has some easy pickings to take advantage of. Why would it go for the far stronger Danny when Jack's mind is already frayed at the edges and so easily unravelled? It can get a whole family of 3 for the price of 1 in this scenario, as by playing with Jack, it also taps into Wendy and Danny's fears of his rage running out of control. If you take into account that the supernatural elements of The Shining can only be explained with a physical counterpart, such as Danny getting strangled and a door being opened by a ghost, then its involvement seems all the more likely. That it has portrayed itself as the ghosts of its past encounters previously, if you look at the TV guests in the scene where Henry Bowers is being driven to kill his father, then the supernatural leanings of the Overlook further play into the evil clown's modus operandi. In short, the Overlook is an extension of Pennywise's reign of terror. So that's where he goes for 27 years at a time. 5. It, Stranger Things, and Coraline share a universe. To further exemplify the reach of the It-verse, there's even more movies that tie in with King's monstrous baddie across the spectrum of the industry. With It acting as the beating heart of this theory once more, fans have speculated that both Stranger Things and Coraline tie into Pennywise's universe. Coraline in particular is interesting as it posits the antagonist, a being from another dimension named the Other Mother, as one of the same species as the terrifying Pennywise himself. And the evidence mounts up as proof. The Other Mother takes the lives of those she convinces to enter her domain, convincing them to love her before taking their essence and turning them into ghosts. The way she does this is much in the same way as Pennywise feeds on fear, as both elicit an emotion in their prey that they then feed upon before killing them outright. And it's only when Coraline and the Losers Club refuse to acknowledge the fate thrust upon them by these villains that they manage to defeat them, refusing the charms of these interdimensional beings that wish to take their life force. In reality, both of these villains are skeletal, arachnid creatures and nothing like the human forms that they masquerade in too. But where does that leave Stranger Things? Well, Bob in Season 2 speaks of his interaction with a clown that frequently terrorised him and offered him balloons back in the 50s. Sound familiar? It should do. And it was actually around the time cycle that Pennywise would have been last active before his 27-year slumber. 4. Carrie is the grown-up version of Matilda. Whilst it might not appear so on the surface, Carrie and Matilda have more than telekinetic powers in common across their two movies, to the point that intrepid internet explorers have connected the dots that Matilda is the child version of the spurned prom queen Carrie. Loosely, the heartwarming Matilda story is just a precursor to the events of Carrie's murderous rampage. Oh, alright then. Goodbye, childhood. The idea goes that Matilda, after being adopted away from her uncaring parents into the loving home of Miss Honey, would be traumatised by her rough upbringing. Honey too, since they'd both been victims of the Trunchbull in their time, so consequently decided to move away and change their names for a fresh start. Considering Honey already has a controlling, evil person in her family, and therefore her genes too, the aforementioned Trunchbull, this quality becomes more and more apparent as she lives out her life with Matilda and turns to religion for comfort, attempting to protect her from the world and her old family in case they ever come looking for her. Matilda is forced to block out her powers and become subservient, until she rediscovers them to terrible consequences in the events of Carrie. Trippy, right? And if you want an extra dose of hot sauce, since Matilda's biological father also sold faulty cars that ended up killing a passenger, the story also ties in very nicely with Christine too. 3. The Mist had to have that horrible ending. Interestingly, Stephen King's written version of The Mist doesn't have the heartrending ending that appears in the movie. Of course, in the screen version, desperate David mercy kills his son and 3 friends at their request with the last 4 bullets in his gun, intending to commit suicide by offering himself up to the creatures of the mist afterwards. As he leaves the car, however, he finds a military force able to break through the clouds that spells hope for humanity. It is bleak as and one of the best endings to a horror movie ever due to the sheer, painful irony of killing everyone only to see his salvation a couple of minutes later. However, in a much more positive spin, there's a theory that suggests that the death of David's son is the only way the military stood a chance of fighting back. Throughout the film, we're shown the ramblings of uber-religious zealot Mrs. Carmody, who time and again is proven actually right in her faith, managing to survive a monstrous insect attack while she stands still and prays for her safety. She's the one that suggests a human sacrifice must be made to appease the mist and bring balance back into the world. And lo and behold, when David's son is killed, the very boy she demanded blood from initially, the terrors of the outside world finally begin to abate. Strange coincidence or prophet of the Armageddon? She did call it after all. 2. Cars is a sequel to Maximum Overdrive. Maximum Overdrive, the one film that Stephen King directed whilst on a massive coke binge and his biggest case of disowning a property he has ever undertaken, is a bad movie. It's a really, really bad movie actually, but the internet has still managed to draw out particularly interesting theories surrounding its narrative of a bunch of killer trucks coming to life in an attempt to wipe out humanity. The main and most plausible one is that this world of murderous motors is actually a setup for Pixar's Cars, in which sentient machines rule the planet without a sniff of humanity to be found anywhere. The theory goes that Cars happens in the millennia that passes after Maximum Overdrive's close, where humanity has been successfully wiped out from other incidences of the machines coming to life over the years, to the point where a society of cars is all that remains on planet Earth in the wake of such disasters. Further proof of this lies in the fact that the automobiles of Cars are built with steering wheels, which is a function only necessary should there be a human driver within the vehicle. If Pixar's Cars were born in a humanless society, they wouldn't know the purpose or need for such a feature. Therefore, they're all descendants of the Green Goblin tanker, forgetting their crimes to the annals of history as the years have gone by. And the Car cinematic universe just got far more interesting. You're welcome. 1. Walter Hobbs from Elf is Paul Sheldon's new identity after Misery. Stay with me here, I promise it's something. It appears that the only thing to tie in Stephen King's intense story of a man trapped and tortured by a superfan and the Christmas-time favourite of a human elf spreading festive joy is that James Caan plays characters living in New York City in both. But that is more than enough for Reddit to run away with a theory that thrives on coincidence. Right, here we go. James Caan plays Paul Sheldon in Misery, who's obviously pretty traumatised after having been hobbled and having to murder the obsessed Annie Wilkes in an act of self-defence. He changes his name to Walter Hobbs to start a new life away from the one he lived as a famous romance author, instead deciding to channel his love for literature into a publishing house, but this makes him unhappy. He becomes the aggravated and bitter man of Elf, who's also played by James Caan, so naturally has an uncanny likeness to that of Sheldon. Walter is on the naughty list for being selfish, which is pretty understandable considering how reaching out to a fan got him tied to a bed and trapped away from the outside world almost permanently, but there you go. That by the end of the movie he's had to have a supernatural event to get him to open up again seems fair considering the tragedies of his lives. And of course, he's then happy enough to turn to writing again, opening his own publishing company that sells books, but without his name anywhere near them. Buddy Hobbs has that job this time. Well, that really was something, wasn't it?